Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, good afternoon. My name is Charles Blaine, and I have been working with Wendy for a while, helping to put on the Good Policy Society luncheons. She can't be here today, so unfortunately you guys are stuck with me, but I'm gonna make it really quick so that you guys can hear from the experts and it'll be more interesting than listening to me talk. But thank you guys again for coming. This is our fourth installment of a series of lunches that Wendy has had planned out, and we have 4 more to go. June will be the last one, so if this is your first one, make sure you go online and sign up and come back. We'd love to have you. You can join, you can be a member. You'll get the updates every month and let you know when they are. They're once a month. We're really prompt with it. From 11:30 to 1, we have you out so you can get back to your day. Today, we have 2 experts on homelessness who are going to talk to us about the issue, both, I guess, here in the city of Houston and just nationally. And so I'll read their bios because I wasn't able to memorize them just yet. So Chief Wendy Baimbridge is a 27-year veteran of the Houston Police Department, and she's currently assigned to the Patrol Region 3, which encompasses 5 patrol divisions and the Mental Health Division. Prior to this assignment, she was the captain over the Mental Health Division. In this capacity, she commanded and managed the division's multifaceted response strategy for individuals with behavioral health problems, which includes oversight of several programs that train and enable Houston's police officers to respond professionally, humanely, and safely as possible to individuals in serious mental health crisis. Assistant Chief Baimbridge earned her bachelor's degree in business administration from the University of Houston and a master's degree in sociology from the University of Houston Clear Lake. And she is married to HPD Commander Larry Baimbridge, and she has a 21-year-old son, Aaron, who's a junior at Texas A&M. Elena Davis is the former CEO and founder of I Am Waters Foundation, a nonprofit 501c3 that delivered 5 million bottles of water, is that correct? Inscribed with the words of inspiration such as hope, peace, love, and dream to make America's homeless to America's homeless via qualified local and national homeless shelters. I'm Waters, along with academic partner UCLA and UT School of Public Health, spearheaded When Water Meets a Higher Need, the study of an unprecedented mission, the only academic study about water needs of the domestic homeless.
Hello, my name is Elena Davis, and I hope everyone can hear me. So, a little bit about myself. I am the founder of this organization, which is no longer a 501c3, but I'm doing it on my own now as an individual. But I am one of 4 kids that was raised by a woman who was raised in an orphanage home and to explain a little bit about how I came by my expertise in the space, because Wendy has her unique experience, and mine is just being raised in it. We grew up very transient, one of 4 kids. I had been to 12 different schools in 12 different cities by the time we ended up in Hollywood. One of the places that we lived in was an Indian reservation, and we lived on $3,000 a year in food stamps, and were extremely transient, very impoverished. And along between food stamps and welfare, my mother also worked as a stripper and a prostitute. And we ended up in Hollywood, California. We were starving. I got a job at a pizza place in Century City, and it was there at 14 years old that I was discovered by Eileen Ford. And overnight, I ended up in Paris, and which kicked off a 15-year career as a model. And I traveled into my adulthood between New York, Europe, and really around the world. So that was a major point change in my life. And it was also a huge change in my family's life, because through me, I had an incredibly lucrative career. And I had a really great upbringing, oddly enough, for the career that I ended up becoming involved in, which was I was very street smart. I was able to stay safe. I magically never became a Me Too. I made a lot of money, bought my first home for my family to settle in when I was 20 years old, which we still own at the beach in California. And it was, we were out. We got out, and we never looked back. And my mother did a really good job making sure that we stayed straight. She didn't do drugs or drink. She made sure we didn't do drugs or drink. It was, if I ever catch you drinking or doing drugs, I'll break your expletive neck. So that was a great incentive to not drink or do drugs. And years later, after a very lucrative career, I was introduced to my husband, Greg Davis, who's here, on a blind date for the Duchess of York. And steadily, my life kept moving further and further and further from the very bleak, dark world that I was raised in. And I was very happy about that. Never had any plans on looking back or thinking about it, and didn't talk about it until a woman here in Houston in 2009, a homeless woman, going from car to car asking for water, came to me and asked me for a bottle of water. And in her request, I had water to give her. Ironically, this was pre-I Am Waters. Gave her the water that I had fresh in my car. The light turned green. I went through the intersection, and as I left her, I literally felt a hand reach into my solar plexus and grab onto me. And that hand hasn't let go. And that was 10 years ago, 5 million bottles of water ago, 29,000 hours of unpaid work ago, and my journey across the United States and the many organizations and nonprofits that I have worked with over the years. So one of the things that I wanted to do in showing the video was homelessness is a very broad discussion, because there's so many roads into homelessness. I mean, there's women, children, youth, elderly, veterans. And for this discussion today specifically, we're talking about serious mental illness. And the way in which I know Wendy Baimbridge, Chief Baimbridge, is from the water program. I Am Waters here in Houston delivered water through her homeless outreach team, which is one of the HOT team, which is truly one of the most amazing teams and the most influential, hardest working, most effective teams in this crisis, our biggest human crisis in the United States, which is our growing homeless population. With that, I'd like to turn it over with Wendy so she can introduce herself, and then we'll get into this niche conversation about the seriously mentally ill homeless.
So thank you, Elena, very much, and for all of your work. You make an impact, and we are very grateful. As Elena stated, that our homeless outreach team at HPD is under the mental health division on HPD's work chart. Why do we have a mental health division in law enforcement? It's because so many people are reaching out to law enforcement these days for mental health reasons. We had over 40,000 calls for service last year to patrol that were mental health related. We had over 10,000 emergency detention orders, which is danger to self or others, where we refer them to commitment to the psychs out of NPC, our mental health authority. And so as you can imagine, it takes a lot of time. And so what the mental health division does is it partners with our mental health authority on several fronts, both proactively and reactively, to do that warm handoff so we won't be called out there over and over, because we are not a permanent resolution to this issue. This issue exists because the mental health authorities are underfunded. And we can go into a whole lot of other things with regards to a lack of bed space for true treatment. But first I want to talk about our homeless outreach team. It's one of the 5 different units that we have within the mental health division. It's comprised of a sergeant, 6 officers, and 3 case managers from our mental health authority. And we take the mental health experts into these wooded encampments and under the bridges and where they were otherwise afraid to go by themselves. We often work with them. In the past, HPD, before our HOT team, we would put them in jail for low-level civility type issues, such as littering, you name it. And you can see what goes on in these encampments. And it wasn't working because we would just see them right out. They would just keep cycling and cycling. And not only through our system, but through a lot of other systems that we see. Our fire department will take them, their ambulance, to the hospitals. We take them to the emergency detention orders, to NPC, our neuropsychological center. We go to jail. So you can imagine it, and nothing is really working. And so our homeless outreach team creates that relationship with them, between them and the police, and that trust. And they like to say that everybody out there is broken in a different way. As Elena has said, there's different subpopulations within the homeless communities. It's a very complex issue. There are those who are addicted, obviously. There are those who are mentally ill. There are those that are both. There are those who can't get a job, although Houston is a little bit different from what's going on in California, and that the cost of living isn't really a major. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, because it's getting higher here, but we don't see it like LA, where you just can't afford your mortgage, so you're out on the street. So we don't see that as much at all. And so, there's the veterans population, although we have, through the mayor's office, has done a lot with our veterans and making sure that they are housed with needed services. As our other issues that we're doing and working with, the mayor has somebody dedicated to the homeless and all these innovative programs that we're trying to do to get them off the streets. But our homeless outreach team, it's been said that taxpayers spend about $40,000 for each homeless person who's out there who's chronically homeless because of emergency services. We're very expensive. But if you house them with wraparound services, true services, treatment, things that they need, it's a $15,000 savings per person. And so when you look at it, I always look at it from the point of, yes, do we have a good service, but is at a cheaper cost, right? And so I'm always looking at that and making sure that we're effective when it comes to that. And so the homeless outreach team does a very good job in housing people, getting them off the streets, a shelter. They get them IDs, because in the state of Texas, believe it or not, to get services, you need an ID. Most of them are lost or stolen, but to get an ID, you need another ID. It's just dysfunction. So what the homeless outreach team does is they work with DPS, and believe it or not, once they started with that program with DPS and getting them IDs, we house 100% increase over the previous year. So we're always, again, looking at ways that we can be more effective. As I said, the mayor's office is involved deeply in trying to do something about the homeless issue, but recently the Harris County commissioners have been involved since Ed Emmett. When Ed Emmett was the judge over there, they created the jail diversion program. And so what that is, it's the pre-arrest diversion program where people can go to get help. It is voluntary. And if they've committed a low-level crime, such as trespassing, which is most of them that are diverted over there, they can get these services if the mental illness is really at the core reason why they're committing that criminal behavior. And so what we've noticed through that program is it does help a lot of people. Our mental health authority runs it. They are there. It's a voluntary program. What we're also noticing is that something that it quantified something we all have known. There is profoundly mentally ill people in this homeless population. You see them downtown. You see what they look like. But now we see them because they're always coming into contact with us because they're creating, they're violating the low-level laws usually. And so when we take them over there, they cycle, just like they've been cycling through other programs. The voluntary aspect of things is very difficult for someone who is profoundly ill and it's been untreated for years and years and years, but most of them also have co-occurring addiction issues. So you can imagine asking someone who is like that, do you want to come with me today and get off the streets and put down the bottle or drug or whatever you're doing and get some treatment and work with the doctors on a voluntary basis? That is almost impossible. It's almost impossible. And so what we're looking at is to prevent the cycle and try to get them some real treatment and a real chance. But also, we have to be responsive to our public who are calling us, who have property rights. Whether you're a business owner or you live, close to where the encampments are, you have rights, and we need to be responsive to them as well. But it needs to help everybody. And so we're looking at a facility where we can have long-term treatment for these folks. We can use the existing civil commitment laws, but we just need a facility for them. And so we are now in discussion about that. And there's, let me tell you, I think that it's a common sense approach, and everybody, I think, would say that. But then there's also those in society who are thinking, oh, against their will, civilly, that sounds familiar. And do we really want to go back there? But let me caution you that it's not a permanent civil commitment like it used to be. It is a civil commitment that's long enough to get them some real help to dry them out, because right now it is when they go on an emergency detention orders, we drop them off. We're lucky if they stay 3 days. 3 days. 3 days isn't going to do anything. They return back to the streets, and there they go over and over and over again. And looking at this population, we're looking at them now, and we think there's about 140 of them that we see, and that are responsible for about 800 emergency detention orders in 1 year, and other criminal activity, low-level criminal activity. We're not talking felons. And so what we think needs to happen is that they get that treatment, and then once they are there for 90 days or however long the psychs think they need to be there, then they're released, but they're released to a step-down facility that has a lot of structure to it. Because if you just release them to that one facility, and if you don't have that other facility for them to go, they're going to go right back out in the streets, and you're going to lose all your gains.
So can I ask you a question?
Yes.
What has to happen in order for, what needs to change in order to make it a mandatory event that you, after somebody's, gone through the system, let's say 3 times, that person then gets marked to, be committed, if you will. And I know some of the issues around that process, one is HIPAA, I think, but the other one, as you were saying, is just, unfortunately, and I heard someone say this, Marbut, who's the new head of the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness, just replaced Matthew Doherty. But what he said, we spoke on a panel a couple of weeks ago in Austin, was unfortunately a lot of people thought that One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was a documentary. And that was kind of the turning point for the shutting down of mental institutions. But we've swung so far in the other direction. So 15 years ago, we had 450,000 psychiatric beds in the United States, and today we have 91,000. In addition to our growing poverty and other issues that we have experienced in over the last, I would say, 10 years, the last 5 years, there's a speed at which this homeless crisis is, kind of growing. But to that, what are the things that have to change, I guess, policy-wise, in order to make it possible for you to make that commitment of that individual for 3 months, 6 months, or however long you think, whatever it would be?
That's a good question. I'm in the process now. We're working with the county attorney's office in this discussion, along with the psychs from the mental health authority, as well as the judges, probate court, because all of the commitments will go through them. And they all agree that something needs to happen. And so we're working on what that something would look like and what it would take with policy. The good thing is, it looks like the laws are there. We just don't have the facility, so that would need to change as well. And we're looking at something right now. It's too premature to talk about in open discussion. But I think that also there needs to be not only political will, but societal acceptance of that. And yes, one flew over the cuckoo's nest. I think when, what is it? Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, right? You see the results of that, and you see that people are not getting help, and these people who can't afford the help, and there's a lot of people who want us to just leave that population alone. But to me, that's inhumane. They're out there. I mean, I was in an encampment not too long ago because we were cleaning it. Every so often, we have to go and clean those encampments. And we work very well. The mental health authority will come in. We'll have management districts and solid waste department and the health department. It's a multi-collaborative event when we go there. And when they pick up those tents, there's rats living under those tents. And I was standing there, and I can't stand those creatures, but why do they pick me out of everybody? He came running up to me and started scratching on my boot. I jumped straight up and said a cuss word. And when I got home, my husband, who was an officer, as we stated, he said, well, because there's body cameras on us all now. And he said, well, how was your day? And he had the video. I thought, God, there's not another test for me to take to go up. I'm still dealing with this. But yes, it's not healthy.
This is really the police in every city. I was just in Los Angeles last week talking to Pasadena police and LAPD, but it's New York, it's everywhere. It's Louisiana, it's everywhere. Our de facto social workers and our prison systems are de facto mental institutions. So nobody wants a solution to this more than the police, if I might speak for all of you. Because as you can imagine, in addition to what they have to deal with, being shot at, killed, being, law enforcement and everything else, they have absolutely been stuck holding the bag for the lack of infrastructure and the failures of the human service system. Very few homeless organizations they don't even do outreach. Most of them don't do outreach. I mean, I think the HOT team is one of the few, but they're 24/7. And there's a criminal element. I mean, to me, if I did drugs and did any number of the things that people do that are homeless on the streets in LA, I'd probably be arrested. And if you have a serious mental illness, as Wendy was saying, and again, this is just all over, but it's not humane not to have mental institutions because women are raped. And schizophrenia, bipolar, they are beat up, they're raped. There's so many terrible things that happen, but this is a very complicated discussion, and I'm sure we all have a lot of emotion around this because this isn't some far-flung concept that we're talking about. I bet everybody in this room has some experience now in the recent past where you're seeing, this is visiting us now on our doorstep, but this has been a long time in coming. And for anybody who follows me on Facebook, you've been hearing me say this for the last 5 years, that there was a crisis coming across the United States, and if we didn't deal with it, we were going to be past the point of no return. And we're really almost there. But I'm going to let Wendy speak to what you're speaking of, because she's the expert in that. But
So just to be clear, yes, you're right. The ACLU has filed a lawsuit. We have a homeless and we have a encampment ordinance. The state of being homeless is certainly not unlawful. So we have to look at all of the debris and all the property associated with that. It disallowed tents. It disallowed no more property that can fit in a 3-foot by 3-foot by 3-foot container. And before we even enforce that law, it necessitates, it demands, it mandates us to do outreach and offer shelter, which is fine. And so we're doing that. And like I said, I feel like the very people who think they're trying to help, in this case the ACLU, is really doing them a disservice. But that's just my opinion. We're still in that lawsuit, but let me be clear, the mayor never told us to stand down. So what I need to do after this is to get with you, and because it needs a specialized response. We have certain officers across the city called differential response team officers, and they're assigned at every patrol division. We have 15 of them. And yours, I think, would be the Midwest Division. And so those officers are trained in what we can enforce right now, since that's currently in a lawsuit. We don't allow the excessive property is still stated there. We don't allow excessive tents. We're allowing one until we can work on that other place for them to go. And just so you'll know also, the city and the county are currently in discussion right now to have another place for them to go. Because right now the city of Houston, Harris County doesn't have that. You see that San Antonio has a really good program that allows the Haven for Hope, that allows at other place for them to go. So we're working on something here. The lack of zoning, let me tell you, it's very difficult. It's very good to be pro-business, but no one wants this in their backyard, right? So we're working on that, and something's going to happen on that front. That discussion still continues. I have a meeting on that next week. But I want to help you because I don't like anybody living like that, and I don't like you being upset about it. So let me just meet with you after this, and I need physical addresses, okay?
so yeah, to add to this, one of the homeless are their own, just visually, the video that you saw, those are all homeless people. And when we see homeless people on the street, it really rubs us the wrong way. It's easy to become very hardened and have a lot of opinions about the people that we see. But the sad fact of the matter is I describe homelessness like an iceberg. There's just a very, very small part of the iceberg above the water, which is our street homeless, which is the serious mentally ill and the criminal aspect. The greater body of America's homeless population is underneath the water. They're living in their cars, they're living in RVs, their mothers and children living in their storage units, they're couch surfing. None of these numbers are included in HUD's point-in-time count, which is an annual one-night count. How many people do we have in the Houston area? I mean, if you go into the HMIS database, which is the HUD database, which is run through the continuum of care agencies located in every city across the nation, if you look and you see unduplicated services for homeless people in Houston, Fort Bend, and Houston, Harris County, Fort Bend, and Montgomery County, there's close to 30,000 homeless people. If you look at the point-in-time count for Houston, Harris County, Fort Bend, and Montgomery County on the coalition website, they'll tell you there's 4,200 people in small print on any given night. to think that you can count homeless people in a one-night snapshot is completely idiotic. So the bigger discussion that we want to have, and I think remedying the seriously mentally ill and really dealing with it, getting them safe, getting them out of the way, getting them off the street, is because we probably have closer to 10 to 15 million homeless people in the United States. And being able to have that discussion starts leading into, for a lot of other bigger discussions that we probably should be having about helping in a much more intensive way, because we do know that there's 4.5 million homeless youth in the United States. That's, again, just what the University of Chicago can count. That's between 18 and 25. The Department of Education says we have 1.5 million homeless children in our public school system. Now, those children have to have at least one parent with them, or they would be in foster care, so there's 3 million there. And there's, all the people that aren't being counted. If you go to Los Angeles, I can take you to swaths of areas where people are just miles of RVs, and people are parked in neighborhoods where they used to live, and they're living in their RVs with their kids because they don't want to move them out of their school zones. What we do know is what goes on with the developing brain of a child who grows up. I mean, I still have issues from the way that we were raised, as Greg can attest, but we won't give him the mic. But, food insecurity and just everything. Like, I'm still sometimes just constantly on high alert, and it's hard to not be like that, but it serves me well in the space that I work in now. So I think I'd like to ask you if you can add anything about some of the solution-based or plan. It may not necessarily be what's going on now, but maybe the vision that you have, because I respect you so much. This is a hard conversation for you to have in your position, and you're having it, and I think the tide is turning in your favor with LAPD and Pasadena police, in California, not here. San Francisco, New York, but everyone's now starting to move to this direction. So if you were the queen of the world, and in my mind you are, what would that vision be? What would that final finished look be?
So, as we stated, it's a very complex issue. It necessitates a complex response. It needs to be holistic. There are different populations within the homeless community. We are working on that other place for them to go with services that are going to be offered. But for the profoundly ill, that won't work. They will not go. It can't be voluntary driven. There needs to be another piece to this. And as you stated, law enforcement has been talking about this for quite some time. And now we've even been given a chance recently to go to the White House and discuss it there. I see articles coming out that you had sent me from Orange County, California, from San Francisco. Everybody is talking about the need for long-term mental health hospital. And that really does need to come back. Humane, clean, and regulated. I mean, don't just assume the worst and shut them down. The only response to that was much later when they brought out boarding homes. Well, boarding homes, by the local code here in Houston, houses 3 or more elders or disabled. Well, we now have to regulate boarding homes, the police, because there's so many calls for service to them. And oftentimes it's the least sickest person that's in charge of those homes. And we got concerned when, crimes would always happen and they didn't even know their names. There were no paperwork, nothing. They would go missing. They didn't even know how to make a missing persons report because we didn't even have a name for the missing. When hurricanes came, they would just, the person that was running it would leave and they would all be there. And not to mention we're housing our elders right next to mentally ill people. And there is a whole new problem there when it comes to victimization of our seniors who have dementia. It's like a childlike mind with money. And so I don't think that was a good response at all. So I do think that they do need help. I do think that we need to fund the mental health authority for this purpose. And there needs to be bed space available for the low-level criminal recidivists that are in the homeless community that are profoundly ill. There is no long-term treatment for them. And the voluntary stuff is not working. And we have the numbers to prove that. I think it's a simple solution. I realize it sounds simple. There's a lot to it. Mental health hospitals, there's a lot of regulation, and they should be to it. But I do think that I've been surprised at the number of people that are actually saying, yeah, we do need that. And a lot of people are telling me, you're trying to bring back the asylums. What are you doing? It's like, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm not talking about a permanent commitment. But living like that woman that lives in a tent, naming the mice that live under her tent isn't safe. It's not humane. It's not healthy. And not to mention all the crime that may be occurring underneath that bridge where she's living with all the other people. So by letting people just go and not enforcing the laws gets people like you frustrated, and rightfully so. Because you have property rights, and I understand that. When it comes to public spaces, though, that becomes very difficult. Like under bridges, that's state property. And so it's a whole nother issue when the lawyers get involved, as y'all know, when it comes to disallowing people in the public space. And that's another problem. And if you even... And like what we're doing now downtown Wheeler Chartres, we're putting fences up because that space is being used for other purposes. They're going to go somewhere. Even though we're out there saying we will house, and we housed 35 people out of one encampment, but there were still another more than 35, double or triple the 35, who says no, 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 no. And so we do need that other place. And I think nationwide, it should not be pushed by law enforcement. That's what I say as well, because anytime that we get involved with something, people think that we just want to lock people up. We want them to get the help that they need. And it needs to be pushed by the Mental Health Authority, and we have a very good one. I think, and I've worked with many of them across this nation because we train other law enforcement agencies across the nation in how to respond to people who are mentally ill and who are homeless, because Houston PD has been in this business for a long time and working with it, and we've gotten grants, funds, and everything else for it. We do a pretty good job with it. So I do think that it's simple, it's robust as far as this response that we're currently working on in Houston-Harris County. I think we do need support from the community, because then you'll get support for the politicians. And many of them have been responsive and have at least given me an ear, and at least have offered to sit down and have a meeting to discuss it. I'm kind of going out because a lot of people have wanted me to talk about this, and it's really not. I wish I could say, yes, we're doing this. I can't say that. I don't know what's going to happen. But at the very least, to champion the discussion. And so thank you for sitting here and being part of this discussion, because it needs to be discussed. It needs to be talked about. If I end up and everybody shuts the door on me, that's fine. At least we're having the discussion. And I think by doing that, we'll move forward and we'll move this pendulum back to some sort of common sense response.
And I think that Robert Marbut, who's the new homeless czar for the nation, will be a good change, hopefully with some of the policies around this. And just one of the most important things, lastly, is, there's a typhus outbreak in Los Angeles, as well as a hepatitis C outbreak. And if anybody thinks, in addition to just an individual homeless person who's mentally ill, who's beat up, raped, all this, it is such a severe public health crisis. This is all happening down right at USC, ironically, where we have kids that are students, but typhus and all this filth and trash. And I always love getting on the plane and flying back to Houston. And I think, we all want Houston to stay, the haven that it is, because the rest of the country seems to be falling apart, so.
Regarding the legalities, we do have the current existing civil commitment laws still on the books and in effect, and we can use them. Now, can they be strengthened? Yes, and we have lawyers looking at that from the mental health authority side. So we lack the facility, we lack the infrastructure to take them to a place that we know that they would have real treatment. You know, it's funny, when I was talking to some of these psychs about trying to get something like this, their eyes lit up. They said, we used to do treatment. they can't keep them there long enough. It's like, imagine a funnel and having this law enforcement just keep filling it up. And there's a certain finite amount of bed space. They have to release them. And a lot of them thought, well, since they're no longer in crisis, I can release them. But that's not treatment. All that is a cocktail. You can't even hardly dry them out because there's a lot of co-occurring addiction issues with mental health out there. That's a very difficult, and the population that I'm talking about, most of them, I would bet my next check, all of them have the co-occurring issues. Regarding the ones that need housing, yes, that would be fine for that other place for them to go with services, job offerings, job skills, things like that. You name it, could be there. With regards to the funding of the facility, at the end of the day, to be able to truly count on it, it's got to be on someone's balance sheet in government. Because if we wait, and the churches do amazing, and I think in the beginning we'll probably have to get some of that going if this comes to fruition, right? If this becomes a reality, we have some ideas, but at this point we're not there yet. So did I answer?
Yeah, and I think, as it relates to the funding, industries impact the way that money runs through everything, whether it's our mental health care system, education, everything. And one of the things that heavily impacts this space is SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Association. The mental health care industry has such an enormous impact on SAMHSA and the way that funds flow through SAMHSA. So SAMHSA was one of the federal agencies that greatly supported psychiatric beds across the nation. And now there's been such a huge turn from mental health, from serious mental illness to mental health. And these online, and I'm not trying to diminish or minimize anything, but we have a tremendous amount of money, coming from SAMHSA that are investing in online bullying campaigns and kids that and this is not a joke, that are bedwetting because their parents got divorced, or these other things. And I'm not saying that they're not important, but what it's done, it's created this enormous distraction from serious mental illness to mental health. And the reason so is because what is mental health? It's a harder thing to define. It's cheaper because of it. And the mental health care industry is really dictating that. So I think you said earlier, it is a reallocation of funds. And I think one of the other things too, it's very difficult because criminal justice, mental health, human services, all of these things are done in silos, and they're all kind of interconnecting at a point, but they're dealt with in silos. So this obviously gets it's like further down the rabbit hole, but there are fixes, and I do believe that this administration and the new head of usage can be a part of addressing how funds flow and kind of dealing with this in a much more entrepreneurial, practical way, because the way we've been doing it obviously doesn't work.
And so we have a saying, and this, this goes back to, we have so many. You saw Houston's heart during Harvey, and how we all helped out one another. That instant gratification to being at the light, that uncomfortable nature of someone right there, and you're like, oh, I have so much. We all have so much, and we can give something. But what happens there is when you enable them to get their needs met on the streets, when we come along, they don't take our help because they're getting the help that they need, that they feel they need. And so, and you're right, there are a lot of scammers out there, quite frankly, who have dropped people off in a van, and then they come back and pick them up, and they're not homeless at all. Now, they're not wealthy, you understand that, but they're not homeless. It is a scam. You don't know who, really, and you won't be able to know. I don't even know, and I've been in this business for a while, kind of reading people as far as their intent, and it is very difficult. So there's a lot of people out there. The best thing you can do if you want to help is give to those places like I Am Waters or somebody else.
We're not a nonprofit.
Oh, you're not a nonprofit.
You'll be happy I'm not fundraising.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But give to those like Star of Hope. Give to those places that, and Star of Hope is wonderful. They change lives over there. And I don't want to push anybody over anybody else, but give to those people who are actually helping them.
I think give to the hot team. Because the police are absolutely holding the bag. Maybe you're too shy to say it, but I would say give to the hot team. They're a nonprofit, and they're out on their bikes. They are interfacing more with this problem than anybody else, and this demographic.
They are serving two different populations within the homeless. The mental health hospitals, the Salvation Army can't help. That is a voluntary. You can't force someone to go to Salvation Army, and they don't offer mental health treatment. And so for the population that are profoundly ill, because y'all, there is a difference between someone who committed a crime because of their mental illness and just a crook with a diagnosis. And it's not a get-out-of-jail-free card, and our officers can discern the two pretty quickly. And so, but for those profoundly ill, it's two different missions. So it would be a mental health hospital with another facility for step-down care upon release. Because like I said, if you treat them for, say, 90 days and you just let them go back and there's no place for them to go, they're going to go right back out to the streets, and you would lose your gains, and they would have a different cycle, albeit it would be longer, but it would be a cycle nevertheless. So you would need a step-down facility for them, a home with wraparound services, with you would have to have psych treatment or probably detox treatment, depending upon what the issues are. And then from there, work with housing. Because people in housing who have housed the homeless will say, you need treatment first. Because if you just put them in an apartment, it's not, they're going to come right back out. And so you need to have a hospital for treatment, and then when they're released, to a step-down care facility. And so it's very complex. It would be run probably by the Mental Health Authority or Harris County Psych Center, somebody like that. We're not sure. But our Mental Health Authority director is talking to us about it, and he and his lawyers and doctors are certainly involved in the discussion, and they'll be taking the lead on at least the discussion. After this, I don't know if they would go to the private sector with it, so all of this is really open. Y'all are really involved in the infancy of what we're talking about. Usually, government keeps everything close and then they go out. But I feel like y'all deserve some sort of answer to know that, we're working on it. It would not be voluntary. It will come with a cost. It would be doctors there, and not only psychs, but you would need medical doctors there as well. You would need detox specialists there as well. So it would be pretty expensive per year to run it. But it's expensive what we're doing now. So if it's just a transfer of cost from one balance sheet to another, we'll see. But yes, it's no I don't think it should be voluntary driven, because you need to know that they're going to be there.
Right, and right now this is pulling on the police, emergency EMS, fire department. I mean, the problem is pulling on everything.
I think the city and the county needs a place for homeless to go instead of being underneath the bridges and in the wooded encampments on other public property. And we don't have that facility, so there's discussions for it, but not an area of town as much as a place for them to go where we can help them, where it would be clean, where it would be safe, that kind of thing. We're discussing. Because a lot of other cities, like I said, San Antonio has it, and it works very well for them.
And can I just say, Robert Marbut, who's the new head of the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness, was the person who created that model.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
that's good.
hopefully it will be something that can be spread across the nation.
Who are profoundly ill, and that's just from what we're seeing as far as the cycle because of the criminal recidivism. We're seeing about 140. Now, I will have to caveat that with we're currently going through them all to ensure that these, and we're working with the lawyers and the courts, and we're saying we're taking each individual case and all the intelligence that we know about that case, and we're saying, would this be a good candidate for that? So to say that yes, this 140, are going, and I'm glad you brought that back up again. So I want to circle back, just because we have the names of people who would be a good candidate, we feel, from law enforcement, we're not doctors, that need this, we would not proactively go up and round up people. We are not doing that. They're coming to us. And so we feel like if they're coming to us in a mental health crisis, then we would then just hand them over to the psychs, which is what we do now, and they would work with the courts on that. And so the legal process is there and it's being used. We just don't have a place to keep them for good treatment, long treatment.
And if I can add to that, the difficulty is there's so many families that they still have, maybe the mentally ill person, in their midst. And pre-HIPAA, in the good old days, you could just commit somebody. I think today, and I'm saying that facetiously, but there was something really great about that. If I had a mentally ill brother that was schizophrenic or bipolar and, eating the wallpaper off the walls every night or being very disruptive, I would be able to commit my brother or, a family member. I think today as it stands, the only two people who can commit somebody for a 72-hour hold is a husband and wife. So, but HIPAA has been a huge impediment to this space because there's many, many more people, and I think this is another thing that must take up a lot of police officers' time, are just taking the calls, dealing with the mentally ill that are still living in their there's a great book if you all want to learn more about this. It's called Insane Consequences, How the Mental Health Care Industry Has Let Down Our Mentally Ill. And it's kind of a one-stop reading that could give you a really amazing history and kind of where we're at today and how we got here with the mental illness discussion.
Well, thank you both, Chief Baimbridge and Elena. You guys are going to stick around if they want to ask some more questions afterwards. Great. If you guys wouldn't mind filling out your Good Policy Society evaluation forms, or just take it with you and you can email your responses to the email address on the bottom, just so we can have some feedback about this event and our next events and, make them a little more specific to everyone's interests. So thank you all for coming out. The next event's on March 11th. I hope you all will be here. And again, the last one's going to be in June, and we'll break for the summer. So hope you guys will join us next month.